This is Mrs. Guides, and today I'm going to be talking about childhood.
Masturbation.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to be talking about, masturbation. No, seriously, I'm going to be talking about childhood memories. Um, the reason why I've started thinking about my childhood is because just over the weekend I found out that my grandmother is not doing very well. She's had a brain hemorrhage where it's permanent damage. She's no longer able to speak or swallow. She's on a feeding tube, and it goes along with her wishes. She didn't wish to live that way. So my mother and my aunt are having to go through some decision making on what to do. So that's where I'm at right now, is just trying to process the fact that I'm going to be losing my grandmother, um, which has been pretty hard for me to process. Thankfully, Bullsome has been there to let me vent, let me grieve, just prepare myself for this. In doing so, I started thinking about my childhood, because most of my childhood revolved around going to my grandparents' house for the summer and for Christmas. They lived on, my grandmother and my grandfather, who's since passed away, you know, they lived on a farm. My mother grew up on the farm. So when we grew up, every summer we would spend weeks of our summer vacation at our grandparents. My brother and I had two cousins around our age, so the four of us would always play, like, make forts. We would play badminton for hours, you know, be siblings against siblings, and or whatever combination we could think of, we would play and have these tournaments, and fish fries, because this was in New York where my grandparents live. So fish fry was huge. Having buffalo wings and all sorts of things, and
Cats on your lap.
yeah, cats on my lap. That's that which reminds me is that my grandmother has always been allergic to cats, and but yet living on a farm, everybody's dropping off cats. So there was barn cats, and I remember being little, like, we could only catch the kittens because they weren't fast enough to run. So there's stories of trying to catch kittens, or going to feed the, the barn cats and everything. We had, growing up, with me growing up, they still had horses. They had two horses. I remember riding on one of the older horses, which was too old to have a saddle on her back, but my brother and I could ride her bareback. Or my aunt had her horse Micah. She would ride the horse with us, because we were still too young to ride a horse by herself. But I just remember a lot of family functions. Christmas was always very interesting in the family. Um, my I don't know. That's nothing. What is everybody's Christmas traditions? Mine was Christmas morning at at home. We would always get up early and open up our Christmas presents, and then we would pack up everything that we wanted to bring with us and go to my grandparents' house. And then within a couple days, we would have another Christmas with the grandparents, the aunts, and the uncle, and the cousins and everything. You know, and we would always, like, go up in a circle with chairs or the floor, and gather around and go by order of age, from the youngest to the oldest, opening presents. My grandfather being the oldest, you know, and being such a big kid that he was, he could never wait to open up his present. So it's like, a lot of times I was such a grandpa's girl growing up, was always sitting next to him. And I would see him corner my eye, just like inching away, like at the corner of the package, just opening up little by little. So by the time it was his turn to open it, it was already halfway open. And we always caught, he was always caught, but no, but everybody let Grandpa do it. It was after he passed away that we all like shared that story. That was one of our fond memories of him. It was such a hard worker that he was growing up. Like he was still working when I was a kid. He didn't retire until like maybe 15 years before he passed away, and even still he did side jobs. He was the type of man that he didn't want to not work. He had to work. And I think he worked up until he started having a lot of health issues. And that was like maybe about 2 years before he even passed away. But now here's my grandmother, she's seen, she was one of six children, you know, one of the middle children. She's seen her older siblings and her younger siblings pass away. Both of her parents, her husband, and just as of a couple months ago, her firstborn, her only son, had passed away all of a sudden, and she never really fully recovered from his passing because it was very sudden. He had a massive heart attack, and that really struck her to the core because you know children aren't supposed to go before the parent. No matter how old the child is, you're supposed to go before that child. And here, she outlived her firstborn. And since then, she kind of has gone downhill. She had a fall last month, and she hasn't really recovered from that. And now she's had this brain hemorrhage, and it's just wiped her out. And but still have a lot of fond memories of her. You know, I would call her even as an adult every week. Every chance I got, I was calling Grandma. Hey, Grandma, how are you doing? I miss you. Even one of the last comments, because I started doing the family treats, working on her family. You know, that was in another vlog, and that was my grandmother's family that I was researching. And I would call her up and get some information about like, okay, what was your grandparents' names? And the Marcus I was talking about was her grandfather, and so it's like, and I was able to share that with her and in turn tell her a little bit of what I found out about her family going back further than she even knew about. And that's actually how I found out about her fall. I was calling her to let her know more information that I found out about. And that's when my dad had answered the phone and told me that she had fallen. And I was calling this time to see how Grandma was doing because I knew she was getting out of the rehab hospital she was in. And as I said, it's processing through all of her health, and now this, I've really started thinking about my childhood because my childhood revolved around going to my grandparents, going on a 6-8 hour drive to see Grandma, and she loved both of my grandparents loved it when we would come up, loved their grandkids, and was always very proud of everything that we had done in life and watching us grow up. I my grandmother has said that many times that her and Grandpa love us, and Grandpa loved us, and how proud he was of all of us, and how she is. And that's the one thing I want to continue doing with my life is just doing things that I want to be, that I feel that she would be proud of. The one thing that I know from her that I'll always carry is my middle name because my middle name is a family middle name. It's my mother's middle name, my grandmother's middle name, and it was her mother's first name. So it's something that's been passed on from generation to generation. So I'll always have, no matter what, I'll always have a part of my grandmother with me. You know, I miss not being able to talk to her, and there's been many a times these past couple days, I just wish I could hear her voice, as I'm sure my mother is wishing for the same thing. Because my mother's the same way as me, would always call her mom to talk to her every week. Hey mom, how you doing? And just, they would talk for hours on the phone. I think I timed my mom one time when I was a kid. They were talking on the phone for like 6 hours. And just about anything and everything. And my grandmother and I would talk the same way. And, she's always been a very strong woman. She, if she wanted to know something, she would straight out ask you what it was that she wanted. She's asked me many personal questions in front of my mother, and questions that I wouldn't really want to answer in front of my mother, because that's the other part of my grandmother and I's relationship is we don't hold back. If she wants to know something, I'll answer it. Doesn't matter what it is. I cannot lie to my grandmother. My mother, sometimes. My grandmother, no. I could never lie to her even if I wanted to. So she would ask me all these personal questions and in front of my mother, and I finally looked at her. I'm like, Grandma, if you really want to know the answer, do not ask me in front of my mother. And the whole time I'm laughing. We've and there's always perversion with my mother and my grandmother and I together. That's something that I can look back and laugh about. It's nothing like having the sex talk with your mother and your grandmother. Mind you, I was an adult and we're all talking about different things and stuff. Like, not obviously not in full detail. I would never want anybody to know my full detail of my sex life, but just
Except me.
yeah, except for Bullzone. But I just remember and poor Bullzone. He's been among many questions that my grandmother has asked to somebody, because he had an incident happen years ago and he's has a back injury. Well, she had asked him what had happened, very point blank, no holds bar, and just like just came out with it like, how did you fall? Just something simple, like, but it was kind of like not ready to answer it. Come on, grandma, stop. And but that's how my grandmother was raised. Like, you want to know something, ask, no matter what it was. It's like, so I always remember those questions that my grandmother asked me from the time I was able to be an adult and think for myself and live my own life without my parents being like, "No, Sarah, you're living underneath this roof. You're still a child. You can't do it." Once I was moved out on my own and living on my own, and Grandma started asking me a little like, "Okay, well, are you having sex?" Well, Grandma, I'm living with a boyfriend, so but yet she would ask me them in front of my mother. Imagine being 18 years old and your grandmother's asked, and you're living with your boyfriend, who later on turned out to be a husband, but you're living with a boyfriend and your grandmother's asking if you're having sex in front of your mother. But but anyways, so I would like to hear about other people's childhood memories, stories about your grandparents. I've shared some of mine. Um, so yeah, please leave comments. I welcome them and I will answer every comment that is left to me. But this is Mrs. Guide signing off, and thank you for watching.